one more thing. Hey, this summer, when you're being inundated with all this American bicentennial 4th of July brouhaha, don't forget what you're celebrating, and that's the fact that a bunch of slave-owning, aristocratic white males didn't want to pay their taxes.
Yeah! Pablo el Molinero. Pablo el Molinero.
Ever since Donald Trump assumed the presidency for his second term, I have believed that contemporary historians would be unable to come to a fair consensus as to the value of his contribution to world events. Personally, I believe that at the very least, he shall be remembered as a transformational figure in history. I say that without assigning a judgment as to the success of his legacy, because nothing so far has actually been resolved. But in any case, the world will be a different place. It's just too early in his second term to understand the long-term effects that his current tenure will have on our country and on history in general. If you watch this channel, then you know I support Donald Trump. I believe that he is confronting problems directly that all of our politicians have ignored for far too long. None of these challenges are more striking than Trump's approach to foreign policy, which is largely the topic of this presentation. But first, I want to add some context to my claim that as a nation, we won't be able to fairly evaluate his presidency for some time to come. The biggest problem has to do with the deep divisions we have in the country, and the biggest culprit is a phenomenon known as Trump derangement syndrome, commonly referred to as TDS. I have said, and I believe, that there are plenty of things about our president that can be fairly criticized. I may disagree with some of those contentions, but I can't say that all the criticism is without merit. But there is a subset of detractors who go into a flying rage at the very mention of Trump's name. These are people who break off relationships with friends and family for simply not denouncing every single thing that Trump has ever done or ever will do as president. There are others, too, who I kind of doubt really believe everything they say about the president, such as certain politicians and members of the press, but their hatred for Trump runs so deep that they can't help themselves. Hating Donald Trump has become a religion of sorts, and members of the flock aren't allowed to deviate from the message. This trend has improved very slightly during this second term, but it was blatant from 2015 right up to the 2024 elections. Okay, you want an example or two? Remember the very fine people quote? Trump said that there were good people on both sides of the argument as to whether or not it was appropriate to have statues of Confederate war heroes in some of our nation's parks. The networks all used his statement to say that Trump was making a moral equivalence between racists and non-racists. The statement was made during a press conference in August 2017, and after another question, he said the following.
You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
None of the networks or other news sources reported on the whole exchange. They all used it to bolster the claim that Trump called neo-Nazis very fine people. They couldn't be bothered to report one more minute of the interview. Incredibly, Jake Tapper still maintains that the coverage of Trump throughout those years was mostly fair. It wasn't. And this is just one example of that trend. I have made this point on various occasions, including 2 videos directed toward Jake Tapper specifically. Feel free to check them out. As a side note, Snopes, one of the media's go-to fact-checking sources, finally fact-checked the quote and found that he did condemn neo-Nazis and white supremacists. But that didn't happen until 2024, almost 7 years after Trump made his very fine people comment. In October of 2024, when Trump held a rally at Madison Square Garden, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and MSNBC compared the event to a Nazi rally held at the old Madison Square Garden in 1939. The network actually broadcast side-by-side photos of the events to show how exactly the same they were. I know plenty of people who bought into that argument. I'll give you another example in the context of current events. Let's look at our war with Iran. With the exception of very few completely uninformed people, most would concur that Iran is run by Islamist fanatics who support terrorism, who suppress the rights of women, and who exercise brutal dictatorial authority over the country's population. Many of those same people will also admit that none of our previous administrations have dealt with the Iran situation effectively. So, during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran in June of 2025, before the United States had entered the conflict, all of the lefties were spreading the Taco Trump phrase, Trump always chickens out. 2 days after the bombing, CNN reported that an anonymous source from the Defense Intelligence Agency said that the bombing wasn't as successful as claimed by the president. The next day, it was revealed that the anonymous assessment was actually labeled as low confidence. There was no way that anyone would have been able to evaluate the level of damage done to those facilities by that time. So, why is it that CNN took a low-confidence and anonymously sourced comment in order to call into question the effectiveness of the bombing? It just seems to me that it's another example of the media abandoning their journalistic ethics in order to try to damage Trump. In the current conflict, the criticism of our involvement includes so many accusations. The war is illegal. Everything about it is chaotic and mismanaged anyway because Trump is so inept. And Trump is really just deflecting from the Epstein Files controversy. Well, the War Powers Act gives the president 60 days to engage in military actions before seeking congressional approval. The point I have made on a couple of occasions is that the president has lawyers too. People who say that it is clearly an illegal war are barking out of their britches. And is Trump mismanaging the military effort? So far, our military has crushed the Iranian forces. I'll concede that we don't know what the end game looks like, and I still question whether the regime will ever surrender or not. But to suggest that the military effort is unsuccessful is ludicrous. And to those who say that our leaders don't have a plan, well, how would they know that? Just because they haven't been told the plan doesn't mean there isn't one. And as far as the Epstein stuff is concerned, I have made my case. There is most definitely a story there, but it isn't Donald Trump. My point about contemporary historians being unable to fairly judge the presidency of Donald Trump is based on the very TDS which is prevalent in much of our press and especially in our most hallowed academic institutions. Given that the attitude that emanates from those circles is so clearly anti-Trump, I have a hard time imagining the president getting any credit for anything good that may come from his administration. I need to point out, I have a hard time with those who refuse to acknowledge the good that Trump has done by removing Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. And I challenge anyone who says that there was any other way to achieve that goal short of a political assassination. From the Venezuelans I have talked to, there is a feeling of optimism there that they haven't felt in years. Everyone could see that Trump was their only hope. Now, Cuba is negotiating with the U.S. to change the way that they govern. Stay tuned for that one. I must also point out that Trump got the remaining hostages out of Gaza and that, for now at least, the ceasefire that ended that war has held. And that is despite the allegiance that Hamas has towards their patrons in Iran. We may be closer to peace in that part of the world than we have been since Yasser Arafat turned down the Camp David Agreement in the year 2000. And I remain cautiously optimistic that the Islamist regime in Tehran will fall sooner or later. My earnest hope is that the Iranian people will rise up to take control of their government. But in any case, our current actions shall be one of the decisive contributing factors to that eventuality. The thing is, Trump may very well end up being responsible for the liberation of at least 3 nations from their dictatorships. But you just know that some are always going to spin it to say that it was illegal, poorly done, whatever. The deranged will still insist that even if all those things were ultimately a good thing, Trump should still be impeached for it. And anyway, he's still evil, and everybody knows that he only did it to aggrandize himself and to get richer. So, my larger point is that we shall have to rely on future historians to be the final judge of Donald Trump's effect on world events. I can't shake the feeling that we are living in one of the most important transformations since the fall of the Berlin Wall. On some level, everything he has done can somehow be related to our relationship with China, who most would consider to be our greatest adversary. I'm not saying that the story ends with Trump, but his presidency may affect historical trends to take us to the next great era of world history. And some people are just going to miss out on it. Thanks for watching. This is Pablo El Molinero.